"Let's see you hit this," he said, a smug grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Those 6 words sliced through the quiet hum of the armory, echoing louder than any gunshot. It wasn't just a challenge, it was an invitation, a test wrapped in arrogance. And for Elena Martinez, lead weapons technician of the 82nd Airborne Division, it marked the start of something she didn't yet understand, something that would test not just her skill, but the boundaries of who she believed herself to be. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Veterans Story channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage, and let us know in the comments where you're watching today. The morning had started like any other at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. The smell of gun oil mingled with the crisp autumn air, sunlight cutting through the narrow armory windows and glinting off rows of M4 carbines, lined like soldiers awaiting inspection. Elena worked alone, her gloved hands steady and practiced as she adjusted the bolt assembly of a malfunctioning rifle. She moved with the precision of someone who found peace in the rhythm of mechanics, the click of metal, the weight of steel, the quiet certainty that every problem had a solution if you knew where to look. She'd enlisted at 18, straight out of El Paso, while most of her friends were still deciding what to major in. For her, there had never been a choice. Her mother, who'd raised 3 kids alone while working nights at a hospital laundry, had taught her that survival wasn't about luck. It was about grit. The Army offered Elena that chance, stability, purpose, and a sense that her precision meant something in a world built on chaos. 6 years later, she'd earned a reputation as the one who could fix anything. Soldiers joked that she could hear a rifle's problem the way a mechanic hears a bad engine. They weren't wrong. To Elena, weapons weren't tools of destruction. They were puzzles, each one with a heartbeat of metal and motion that only she seemed to understand. That morning, as she reassembled the rifle piece by piece, the metallic clank of the armory door broke her concentration. Staff Sergeant Derek Vaughn stepped inside, his presence commanding and deliberate. A sniper by trade, Vaughn was known around base for his deadly accuracy and his ego to match. Slung over his shoulder was a sleek, modified M110 sniper rifle, one of the newer semi-automatic systems. "Martinez," he said, setting it down carefully on her bench. "The zero's off. My shots were pulling left yesterday. Figure out why." Elena wiped her hands on a rag and leaned over the weapon, her brown eyes narrowing as she examined the scope and mounting system. "When did you last have it professionally calibrated?" 3 months ago, right before the division match," Vaughn replied, arms crossed, impatience visible in his stance. She nodded and began her work, methodical, precise. The world outside could crumble, but when she was focused like this, time slowed to a heartbeat and breath. Each movement had purpose: loosen, inspect, clean, reassemble, test. The Leupold scope gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its internal lenses reflecting faint ghosts of her face as she adjusted the elevation knob. Around her, the armory began to stir. Soldiers filtered in, their conversations overlapping in bursts of laughter and excitement. Something was different about the tone today. Anticipation hung in the air. "You hear about the challenge next week?" one private said to another. "Division-wide competition. Winner gets a 3-day pass and bragging rights till next year." Elena's attention sharpened. She'd heard whispers of the event before but hadn't paid much mind. Her role was to maintain, not compete. Still, something about the idea tugged at her. The possibility of testing herself not as a technician but as a shooter. Thinking about signing up? Vaughn's voice broke into her thoughts. He was watching her closely now, curiosity replacing his earlier irritation. "Support staff don't usually compete," she replied without looking up. "This one's open to all MOS," he said. "They want to see who the best shooter on base really is." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she found the problem, a speck of grit wedged beneath the turret housing. Carefully, she cleaned and reassembled the scope, her fingers moving with surgeon-like precision. "Try it now," she said, handing him the rifle. Vaughn lifted it to his shoulder, sighted through the glass, then lowered it with a satisfied smirk. "Perfect. You always nail it." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "You should enter the match, Martinez. I've seen you at the range after hours. You're better than half the guys competing." When he left, the armory felt quieter, but not calm. Elena's mind buzzed. Competing had never been her goal. She was proud to be the quiet expert behind the scenes, the unseen force ensuring everything worked when it mattered most. But now the idea lingered like static. What if I'm capable of more? She tried to push it aside, losing herself in her routine maintenance checklist, but the thought kept returning, persistent, alive. By the time her lunch break rolled around, she was staring at the empty doorway where Vaughn had stood, her pulse quickening with a mixture of excitement and fear. That afternoon, she found herself walking toward the registration office, boots crunching over the gravel path. She could almost hear her mother's voice in her head. "If you're scared, that's the sign it's worth doing." The clerk behind the desk raised an eyebrow when she asked for an entry form. "You sure, specialist? These competitions get rough. Not just target practice, it's the real deal." "I'm sure," Elena said simply, pen scratching across the page as she signed her name. Her handwriting was steady, deliberate. She didn't know it then, but that single decision, made in a moment of quiet defiance, would shift everything that came after. It would draw eyes she didn't expect, from people who saw her not as a mechanic but as a potential weapon herself. Outside, the afternoon light had softened into gold. The sound of distant gunfire echoed from the practice range, rhythmic and sharp like punctuation marks on a sentence that hadn't yet been finished. Elena looked out toward the horizon, the rifle grease still staining her hands, and smiled to herself, a small, determined curve of the lips that hinted at both courage and recklessness. Whatever came next, she was ready, or at least she wanted to believe she was. The shooting range at Fort Liberty was already alive by dawn the following Saturday. The metallic ring of shots echoed across the open field, cutting through the humid Carolina air. Elena arrived early, 30 minutes before the first safety briefing, carrying a worn rifle case that had belonged to her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who'd taught her how to shoot in the deserts outside Tucson. She stood for a moment at the edge of the range, taking it all in, the smell of gunpowder, the low murmur of soldiers comparing equipment, the confident laughter of men who'd done this dozens of times before. Her hands gripped the case tighter. She didn't know if she belonged here, not really, but she was here anyway. When she opened the case, the familiar weight of her M4 greeted her like an old friend. It wasn't custom-built or high-end. No carbon fiber stock, no match-grade barrel. Just standard issue, tuned and cleaned to perfection by her own hands. Every scratch and scuff carried a story. Competitors lined up in rows, the majority of them infantry and special operations soldiers, people whose job was to live and breathe marksmanship. Elena noticed their expensive optics, their sleek gear, and for the first time a flicker of self-doubt wormed its way into her chest. She didn't have their confidence, but she had something else, a kind of intimacy with her weapon that came from years of repair and care. First time competing? The voice was female, calm and strong. Elena turned to see a tall woman with sharp blue eyes and captain's bars glinting on her collar. "Yes, ma'am," Elena said, straightening instinctively. "I thought so." The captain smiled. "I remember you from the armory, Martinez, right? You fixed my rifle's trigger issue last month." "Yes, ma'am." "Captain Mitchell?" "That's right." Mitchell offered her a gloved hand. "Good to see you out here instead of behind a workbench. What made you sign up?" Elena hesitated, the truth hovering on her tongue. "Because I'm tired of fixing other people's rifles instead of firing my own. I wanted to see if knowing how they work means I can make them work," she said instead. Mitchell's smile deepened. "Good answer. Remember, breath control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze. The fundamentals never lie." The range officer's whistle cut through the chatter. "First round. 10 shots, 300 yards, prone position. You've got 2 minutes." Elena lay down on the mat, the stock of her rifle pressed firmly into her shoulder. Through her scope, the black circle of the target floated steady and sharp against the white paper. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to a tunnel of crosshairs and heartbeat. She squeezed the trigger, smooth, deliberate. The rifle kicked gently, and her mind immediately calculated recoil, drift, and sight picture for the next shot. By the end of 10 rounds, she felt the quiet satisfaction of precision. No wild shots, no panic, just control. When the ceasefire whistle blew, soldiers stood, stretching their arms and murmuring about wind and bullet spread. Elena stayed still, eyes closed for a brief second, memorizing the feeling. She didn't know yet how well she'd done, but something in her gut told her it had been good. 20 minutes later, the electronic scoreboard confirmed it. Her name sat in the top 10. "Damn," someone muttered nearby. That armorer just outshot half the infantry. A laugh followed, but it wasn't mocking. It was impressed. Staff Sergeant Vaughn appeared beside her, grinning as he read the board. Looks like all that time fixing our gear paid off. Nice work, Martinez. Thanks, Sergeant, she said, smiling faintly, but her heart was still racing. The next round tested standing shots at 200 yards. Her smaller frame worked in her favor. Less muscle fatigue, more stability. The rifle felt like an extension of her body now, every motion fluid and instinctive. She took her shots with rhythmic precision, adjusting for wind between each one. When she finished, her arms trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came from being completely in control. As she lowered her weapon, she noticed a man watching her from the shadows near the far edge of the range. He wasn't wearing a standard uniform. His fatigues were unmarked, his stance too still, too deliberate. His gaze locked onto her through a pair of dark sunglasses, unblinking. When she met his eyes, he nodded once. Not friendly, evaluative. Like a scientist observing a specimen, a shiver crawled down her spine. "Everything okay?" Captain Mitchell asked as she approached. "Yeah," Elena said quickly, glancing back. But the man was gone. The day continued in a blur of movement, commands, and gunfire. Rapid-fire stages, moving targets, changing light. By late afternoon, sweat dripped down her temple, but her focus had never wavered. Every squeeze of the trigger came with the same silent prayer. Steady, breathe, exhale, release. When the final scores of the day were posted, she found her name again, 7th overall. She'd qualified for the advanced rounds. The realization hit her like a jolt. She wasn't just keeping up. She was competing among the best shooters in the division. As she packed her rifle, a voice broke the quiet. "Impressive shooting. Specialist Martinez." She turned to see the man from earlier walking toward her. Up close, his features were sharp, controlled. Short dark hair, olive skin, and a jaw set like stone. His name tape read Morrison. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied cautiously. "Not many technicians make it this far," he said, studying her rifle with faint amusement. "Your consistency's unusual. You ever think about putting those skills to broader use?" She frowned slightly. "I just like hitting the target, sir," he smiled thinly. "Sometimes the target's not just paper." Before she could respond, Captain Mitchell appeared beside her, her tone polite but edged. "Sergeant Morrison, didn't realize you were here." "Just observing," he said smoothly, "always scouting for talent." Mitchell's expression didn't change, but Elena caught the flicker of warning in her eyes. "Good job today, Specialist," Mitchell said firmly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's rounds will push everyone to their limits." "Yes, ma'am." As Elena turned away, she could feel Morrison's gaze burning into her back, a weight that followed her all the way to the armory, all the way through her evening cleaning ritual, and into her dreams. That night, lying in her bunk, she replayed the day's moments again and again, the shots, the scoreboard, the mysterious sergeant's words. Sometimes, the target's not just paper, it sounded harmless enough, but something in his tone had felt off. Too calm, too certain. And as the base lights dimmed outside her window, Elena Martinez realized that for the first time since she'd joined the army, she wasn't entirely sure who she could trust, or why she'd suddenly caught the attention of a man who seemed to see her as something more than a soldier, something useful. The next morning arrived gray and windblown, the kind of weather that turned even seasoned marksmen uneasy. Gusts swept across Fort Liberty's range, rattling the targets and carrying whispers of tension from one shooter to the next. For Elena Martinez, the uncertainty of the weather mirrored the unease that had settled deep in her chest overnight. She'd barely slept. The conversation with Sergeant Morrison replayed on a loop in her mind, his voice calm, almost charming, but threaded with something sharp underneath. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just another recruiter fishing for talent, but instinct said otherwise. She'd spent 6 years reading the behavior of soldiers the way she read the subtle wear patterns on rifle bolts. Something about Morrison didn't fit. Still, she had a competition to finish, and Elena Martinez didn't back away from unfinished work. By the time she reached the range, most competitors were already setting up. Staff Sergeant Vaughn gave her a nod as she passed. "Ready for the long shots?" he asked, tightening his sling. "As I'll ever be," she said, forcing a smile. Today's stage was different. Targets up to 800 yards, long-range shooting where even the air itself became an adversary. Elena had studied the math, bullet drop, wind drift, ballistic coefficients. But theory and execution were two different worlds. Morrison was there again, standing in the observation area, talking quietly with two civilians in plain clothes. Their badges were turned inward. They didn't belong, but no one challenged them. His eyes found Elena almost immediately. She forced herself not to look away. The first round began. Shooters took their positions one by one, each with their own ritual. Some whispered, some prayed, some spat dust and muttered curses. Elena simply breathed. At 800 yards, the black targets looked impossibly small. Through her scope, the world trembled. Mirage waves distorting the field, the wind flags fluttering like nervous hands. She adjusted her elevation knob, her brain running the calculations automatically. Wind speed 7 miles per hour from the west. Drop 30 inches. Correction. 2 clicks right, 1 up. Her finger rested on the trigger, the rifle solid against her shoulder. She felt her pulse steady, her breathing even out. The first shot broke clean and true. A second later, the faint metallic ring of impact echoed across the field. She exhaled slowly. One hit, then another. Then another. With each shot, she adjusted slightly, reading the wind by instinct now, trusting her feel for the weapon. The recoil became rhythm, the sound of the bolt action a steady heartbeat in her ears. When the final whistle blew, she realized she'd fired one of her cleanest strings yet. As she cleared her rifle, she glanced toward the observation line. Morrison was already watching her, expression unreadable, hands clasped behind his back. He said something to the civilians beside him, and one of them scribbled notes. That was the moment she knew. This wasn't about competition anymore. She was being studied. Excellent shooting, Martinez. Morrison's voice came from behind her as she packed her rifle. He moved like a man who didn't need to announce himself. Controlled, economical. Thank you, Sergeant, she replied carefully. He tilted his head, eyes sharp. You have an intuitive understanding of wind correction. That's rare. Most shooters can't adjust that fast. I've spent enough time fixing scopes to know what makes them lie, she said, trying to keep her tone light. He smiled faintly. That's exactly the kind of thinking I like. Elena looked up at him, frowning slightly. What do you mean? Let's just say I work with units that value precision over firepower. People who know that one perfect shot can end a war faster than 1,000 rounds. Before she could respond, the range officer shouted for the next round's prep. Morrison leaned in slightly, his voice lowering so only she could hear. Let's talk more after you finish today. I think you'll find the opportunities interesting. Then he was gone, striding back toward the line of plain-clothed observers. Elena stood frozen for a heartbeat, the echo of his words settling like lead in her stomach. The next stage tested time and speed, rapid engagement across multiple distances. The pressure built quickly, her body running on instinct. 10 seconds per shot, shifting targets, constant wind. She barely noticed the strain until her arms started to tremble. But the rhythm took over again. Focus, adjust, fire. She wasn't thinking anymore, she was reacting, responding, reading the air. When the ceasefire came, the officer raised his clipboard. Top score, Specialist Martinez. A few competitors clapped. Vaughn whistled low. Elena smiled, but her chest was tight. Somewhere inside her, a quiet voice whispered, You've just proven something, and someone was waiting to see it. When the day ended, she ranked 3rd overall, unthinkable for someone outside a combat unit. Vaughn congratulated her with a grin, but she barely heard him. Morrison was waiting near the edge of the range, leaning casually against a utility truck. As she approached to leave, he stepped forward. Walk with me, he said. It wasn't a suggestion. They moved along the perimeter road, gravel crunching under their boots. The air smelled of dust and oil. You've got real potential, Martinez, Morrison said quietly, not just as a marksman, as something more. She studied him from the corner of her eye. More how? He didn't answer directly. There's a program, selective, off the books. We train people like you for missions that require absolute precision. No wasted shots. No second chances. That sounds like sniper school, she said cautiously. It's beyond that. He smiled without warmth. It's about solving problems before they reach the battlefield. Her stomach turned. You're talking about assassinations. He didn't deny it. I'm talking about eliminating threats to national security. Quietly, cleanly. They walked in silence for several seconds. Finally, she said. That's not what I joined for. He looked at her with something between amusement and pity. You think the Army's about what you joined for? It's about what the country needs. And right now it needs people like you. Elena stopped walking. Then it's going to have to find someone else. Morrison's expression darkened barely, but enough to make her pulse spike. Think about it. I'll be in touch. He walked away without another word. That night, Elena couldn't focus on anything. She sat at her desk, disassembling and reassembling her sidearm over and over, her mind spinning faster than her hands. Morrison's offer, or threat, hung in the air. Her training told her to report it. But report what? He hadn't technically said anything illegal. Just unsettling. Eventually, she opened her laptop and accessed the internal personnel database, typing his name. SFC Daniel Morrison. The record was bare, too bare. Deployment history redacted. Unit assignments. Special Operations Command classified. Gaps everywhere. Her cursor hovered over the empty fields and she felt a chill trace her spine. Whoever he wasn't operating under normal authority. She closed the laptop, the room suddenly too quiet. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Somewhere beyond the barracks, she could hear the faint, rhythmic pop of gunfire from the range, ghostly echoes under the night sky. And for the first time since she'd enlisted, Elena Martinez wondered if her country's battles weren't all fought on the field she could see. By the next morning, the storm clouds over Fort Liberty had broken open into a cold, unforgiving rain. The sky hung low and metallic, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Elena Martinez arrived at the range early. Again. Old habit. She liked to see the field before it filled with noise and people, to feel the wind, the dampness, the weight of the day before anyone else did. But today felt different. Heavier. The competition had narrowed to 20 finalists. The best shooters on base, men and women whose careers revolved around combat, not maintenance benches. Elena knew she didn't belong among them, or maybe she did. Her scores had proven something, but that proof had come with a cost. Morrison's attention. As she laid out her rifle and gear, she could sense him nearby before she even saw him. When she finally looked toward the observation platform, there he was. Dark jacket, unreadable expression, speaking quietly to someone she didn't recognize. The man beside him wore civilian clothes, but his stance screamed military. Intelligence, maybe. Elena turned back to her rifle. She couldn't afford to be distracted now. First stage, the range officer barked. 800 yards. Variable wind. 5 minutes. Elena steadied herself on the mat. The rain had eased, leaving a mist that blurred the far targets into gray ghosts. Through the scope, she could barely make out the thin black circle. Every instinct she had screamed that this would be the hardest test yet. She adjusted her sights, calculated for the wind, and exhaled slowly. Trust the rifle. Trust the math. Trust yourself. The first shot rang out, solid impact. She felt it before she even saw it. The second shot corrected for drift. The third hit dead center. Each trigger pull came with the same rhythm. Inhale, pause, squeeze, follow through. She wasn't just shooting anymore. She was solving an equation in motion, one that existed between steel, air, and instinct. By the time the whistle blew, her score placed her near the top again. A quiet murmur rippled across the other shooters, the kind that meant they'd noticed. She didn't look at Morrison, but she could feel him looking at her. He approached her afterward, as predictable as the recoil of a rifle. Outstanding work, he said softly, stepping close enough that she could smell the faint trace of coffee and gun oil on him. You read the wind better than most trained snipers. I read everything, she said flatly. He smiled. Good, then read the situation carefully. Elena froze. You've shown you can perform under stress. You adapt, you don't hesitate, and you don't miss. His eyes narrowed slightly. That combination is valuable. Her throat tightened. You said that yesterday. And you still haven't given me an answer. She met his gaze squarely. Because I'm not interested. He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. You might want to reconsider before someone makes that decision for you. Her pulse spiked. Is that a threat? Just a prediction, he said quietly, his tone too calm. The Army doesn't waste talent. Someone will decide where you belong. Before she could respond, the range officer called for the next event. and Morrison stepped back, expression smooth, composed, and infuriatingly confident. The following hours blurred into motion, multiple targets, shifting wind, time constraints. Elena's muscles ached, but she refused to slow down. Rage fueled her precision now. Rage at Morrison's smug certainty, at the idea that she was something to be used. When the final round was announced, silence fell across the field. "One shot," the officer said. "Unknown distance. You have 1 minute to estimate and fire." It was the kind of test legends were made from. Elena lay prone again, feeling the cool mud seep into her sleeves. She peered through her scope. The target was barely visible, just a small white disk against the far hill. Her mind calculated automatically. Range, wind drift, elevation, humidity. Everything she'd studied, every hour spent tuning rifles for other people, came together in that single moment. Focus. Her breath steadied. The crosshairs aligned. When she squeezed the trigger, time seemed to stretch. Then, clang. The faint metallic ring carried across the range, followed by a collective gasp. Elena had hit it. A clean, perfect strike. Applause broke out. Vaughn slapped her on the back, grinning. "Hell of a shot, Martinez. You just made history," but she barely heard him. Morrison was already walking toward her, slow and deliberate. When he reached her, the corners of his mouth curved upward, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "That," he said, "was extraordinary." She began to pack her rifle. "Just doing my job." "No, Martinez," he said quietly. "You just demonstrated the kind of precision that changes how people see you." The words chilled her more than the wind. "What people?" she asked. He ignored the question, gesturing toward a black SUV parked near the edge of the field. "Walk with me. I want to show you something." Every instinct in her screamed to refuse, but the way he said it, the way his voice carried quiet authority, made it clear that refusal might not matter. She followed, though the vehicle took them to a section of the base she'd never been cleared to visit, before a stretch of road leading to a low, nondescript building with no signage. Guards at the gate waved them through after a single glance at Morrison's credentials. Inside, the space looked less like a military facility and more like a laboratory. Racks of rifles gleamed under bright white light. Computers hummed softly, displaying complex ballistic data. A few people moved quietly from station to station, their faces hidden behind badges that simply read, "Restricted Access." Morrison stopped beside a sleek rifle set up on a rest, its barrel longer and heavier than anything Elena had seen before. "This," he said, "is the future of precision warfare, capable of accurate fire at over 1,500 yards, the kind of weapon that ends conflicts before they begin." Elena crossed her arms. "You mean before anyone can question them?" He smiled thinly. "Sometimes questioning gets people killed." Her jaw clenched. "You brought me here to impress me." "To recruit you," he corrected. "You have the mind of a technician and the instincts of a sniper. That combination doesn't come along often." She stared at him, her voice steady but cold. "And what happens if I say no?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Then someone higher than me decides how your talents will be used. Either way, Specialist Martinez, you don't go back to the armory." Silence filled the space, heavy and suffocating. Elena looked at the rifle, its matte black surface, its perfect geometry. It was beautiful, precise, deadly. But in that moment, all she could see was the absence of choice reflected in the polished steel. "I appreciate the offer," she said at last. "But I didn't join the army to become a ghost." She turned to leave. Morrison didn't stop her, but his voice followed her out, low and even. "Everyone becomes a ghost eventually, Martinez. The only question is, who gets to write your story before that happens?" Rain still slicked the streets when Elena Martinez returned to her barracks. The sky outside had shifted from iron gray to near black, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound. She shut the door and locked it, then leaned against the wall, her pulse still pounding from the conversation in that hidden facility. Morrison's words echoed in her mind. Calm, certain, dangerous. Either way, you don't go back to the armory. For the first time in years, Elena felt cornered. She sat on her bunk, staring at her hands. The same hands that could fix a rifle blindfolded now trembled faintly. He'd seen something in her, a skill set she had built from pride and discipline, and twisted it into something predatory. The idea of being trained to kill from a mile away wasn't just unsettling. It felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about service and purpose. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Report to Building 47, 0900 hours. Special Operations Command. Mandatory assignment. Her stomach turned. Morrison had moved faster than she expected. At dawn, she walked into the armory to find Master Sergeant Williams waiting for her. A thick envelope of orders in his hand and a look of regret in his eyes. Rodriguez. Sorry. Martinez. These came down late last night, he said, lowering his voice. Transfer orders. Effective immediately. You're being reassigned to Special Operations. Elena forced herself to sound calm. Do you know what kind of project it is? He shook his head. All classified. But between you and me, this doesn't smell right. They don't normally fast-track support techs into SOC unless something's off the books. She nodded slowly. Can I make a call before I report? Take as long as you need, he said quietly. I'll stall them if I can. Elena stepped outside, the morning air sharp against her face. She pulled out the business card Captain Mitchell had slipped her days earlier. No name, just a phone number. Mitchell had warned her. If Morrison pushes you, call this number. They'll know what to do. She dialed. 2 rings. Then a calm female voice answered. Security Review Office. This is Specialist Elena Martinez, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I think I'm being coerced into a special operations assignment I didn't request. A brief pause. Then the woman said, Hold for Colonel Hayes. Seconds later, a deep male voice came on the line. Specialist Martinez, Captain Mitchell briefed me about your situation. Are you under active pressure to report? Yes, sir. Orders to Building 47, 0900 hours. Do not report, he said firmly. Instead, proceed to Building 12, Room 203. Ask for Major Peterson. She's expecting you. Those orders are not valid and will be countermanded under review authority. Sir, Elena whispered, won't refusing a transfer be considered insubordination? Not when those orders were issued under improper channels, Hayes replied. You're under protection now. Move quickly. The line went dead. Building 12 was an unremarkable 2-story structure near the administrative wing. Room 203 had no nameplate, only a number. Inside, a woman in her 40s sat behind a desk covered in neatly arranged files. Her uniform was crisp, her gray-streaked hair tied back with precision. Specialist Martinez, she said without looking up. Have a seat, Elena obeyed. I'm Major Evelyn Peterson. Colonel Hayes called ahead. She opened a folder. You've been identified as a subject of coercive recruitment under Sergeant First Class Daniel Morrison's program. So it's real, Elena said quietly. Whatever he's doing, it's real. Oh, it's real, Peterson replied. Unofficial, of course. His unit operates under the guise of Special Operations Command, but in practice, they're an autonomous task force. Classified missions, minimal oversight. They recruit soldiers with unique skill profiles. You're one of them. Elena swallowed hard. He said I didn't have a choice. Peterson's gaze softened slightly. That's what they always say. They identify talent, isolate it, and apply pressure until compliance seems like patriotism. And if I keep saying no, then we protect you, Peterson said simply. Our office was created to counter programs like Morrison's, but we'll need your cooperation. Documentation, testimony, everything you remember about his recruitment attempts. Elena hesitated, then nodded. I'll tell you everything. For the next hour, she detailed every interaction, from the first competition to the facility, to the threat-laced invitation. Peterson listened in silence, occasionally jotting notes. When she finished, Peterson closed the folder gently. You did the right thing, Specialist. Your orders to Building 47 have been rescinded. Morrison has been informed you're under review protection. He won't contact you directly again. And if he does? Peterson slid a small secure phone across the desk. Then you call me immediately. Elena stared at the phone for a long moment before taking it. What happens to him? That depends, Peterson said. But rest assured, his leash just got a lot shorter. That night, back in her quarters, Elena sat on her bunk with the secure phone beside her. Rain pattered softly against the window, and for the first time in days, she felt something close to relief. But peace didn't last long. At 10:43 p.m., her regular phone buzzed again. Unknown number. One message offer still stands. Reconsider your position. She stared at the words until the letters seemed to blur. Then she deleted the message, powered off the phone, and placed it face down on the table. The next morning, she found Captain Mitchell waiting outside the armory. The older woman looked tired, but when their eyes met, she gave a small nod. "He reached out, didn't he?" Mitchell asked quietly. Elena nodded. "Good," Mitchell said, almost to herself. "That means Peterson's file on him will move fast." "Captain," Elena said, "why are you helping me?" "You could have just ignored it." Mitchell's expression softened. "Because I've been where you are." She looked out toward the horizon.
"Years ago, I said yes to Morrison's people.
I told myself it was for the good of the country. It wasn't." Elena studied her face. "What did they make you do?" Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Things that don't leave you even when you try to forget. Targets that had names, families, lives. You think you can justify it until you realize you stopped asking why." Silence stretched between them. Then Mitchell added, "You made the harder choice, Martinez. Don't ever doubt that." Weeks passed. The storm of paperwork and investigations churned in the background, while Elena returned quietly to her duties. The armory felt like home again, metal, oil, and silence. Sometimes she'd catch whispers that Morrison's program had been suspended, its operations under review. Other times she'd see dark SUVs passing through the base and wonder if he was inside one of them. But he never came for her again. One evening, as she closed the armory for the night, she lingered by the bench where she'd first met him. The tools were neatly arranged, the light low and golden. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished rifle barrel before her. Morrison had wanted her to become a weapon. Instead, she'd chosen to remain the one who understood them. There was strength in that, quiet, steady, defiant. She thought about what he'd said before she walked away that day. Everyone becomes a ghost eventually. Maybe that was true. But ghosts, she realized, didn't have to haunt others. Some guarded the living instead. Elena smiled faintly, turning off the light. Her war wasn't about targets anymore. It was about integrity, about precision in the choices that defined her humanity. And that, she thought, was the cleanest shot she'd ever made.